I never thought I'd fall in love in a garage that smelled like motor oil and old coffee, but life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I was 23, fresh out of college, with a useless liberal arts degree and a car that was barely holding itself together. The check engine light had been on for 3 months, and I'd been ignoring it like I ignored most of my problems back then, hoping it would just go away on its own. The transmission finally gave out on a Tuesday morning. I was on my way to another soul-crushing job interview when the car just stopped responding, making this horrible grinding sound that told me I was completely screwed. I managed to coast into the parking lot of a small independent garage I'd driven past 100 times, but never really noticed. The sign out front said, Hayes Auto Repair in faded red letters, and there was a handwritten note taped to the door that read, "If we're not here, we're probably getting coffee. Back in 10. I sat in my dead car for 20 minutes, watching the clock on my phone tick past my interview time, feeling that familiar weight of failure settling onto my shoulders. That's when I saw him walk up, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, grease stains on his jeans, and a flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead, and these incredibly warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being comfortable with it. "Rough morning?" he asked, nodding toward my car as he unlocked the garage door. "You could say that," I said, getting out. "My car died. I missed a job interview, and I'm pretty sure I can't afford whatever's wrong with it." He laughed, but it wasn't mean. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were in on the joke instead of being the joke. "Well, let's start by figuring out what's wrong. I'm Hayes, by the way." "Dylan," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and I noticed the calluses on his palms, the evidence of real work. My own hands were soft, useless. The hands of someone who'd spent 4 years reading books and writing papers and learning absolutely nothing practical. He popped the hood and started poking around, making these little humming sounds as he examined different parts. I stood there feeling completely out of my depth, watching the way he moved with such purpose and certainty. Everything about him seemed grounded, real, like he belonged in the world in a way I'd never quite managed. "Transmission's shot," he said finally, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. "I can fix it, but parts and labor, you're looking at around $2,000. My stomach dropped. I had maybe $300 in my checking account. "I don't have that kind of money." Hayes studied me for a moment, and I felt suddenly exposed under his gaze, like he could see right through me to all my failures and insecurities. "You said you missed a job interview. You looking for work?" "Desperately. I graduated in May and I've been applying everywhere, but nobody wants to hire someone with a philosophy degree and no real skills." "Can you follow instructions? Show up on time? Not mind getting your hands dirty?" I nodded, not sure where this was going. "I could use some help around here. My last assistant moved to Denver 3 months ago, and I've been drowning in work. I can't pay much to start, maybe 15 an hour, but I could teach you the trade. Consider it an investment." He smiled again, and something in my chest did this weird flutter thing I didn't quite understand. "You learn fast, prove yourself useful, and we can work out a deal on your car repairs. Sound fair?" I should have been suspicious. I should have wondered what the catch was. Instead, I just felt this overwhelming rush of relief and gratitude. "Really? You'd do that? Everyone deserves a chance to learn something useful," he said. "Besides, you look like you could use a break." That's how I ended up working at Hayes Auto Repair, and that's how my entire life changed in ways I never could have predicted. The first few weeks were brutal. I knew absolutely nothing about cars. I couldn't tell a carburetor from a catalytic converter. Hayes was patient, though. Almost impossibly patient. He'd explain things clearly. Show me how to do something once. Then let me try while he watched, and gently corrected my mistakes. "Don't force it," he'd say, his voice calm and steady. "Let the tool do the work. Feel the resistance and work with it, not against it." He had this way of teaching that made even complicated things seem manageable. He never made me feel stupid for not knowing something. Never got frustrated when I messed up. Instead, he'd just smile and say, "That's how you learn. Try again." I started noticing things about him that I probably shouldn't have been noticing. The way his forearms flexed when he was working on something stubborn. The small scar above his left eyebrow that I wanted to ask about but didn't. How he always smelled like coffee and motor oil and something else. Something clean and masculine that made me want to lean in closer. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about cars. Like they were puzzles he genuinely enjoyed solving. I'd catch myself staring sometimes, watching him work, admiring his competence and skill. I told myself I was just trying to learn, observing his technique. But that wasn't entirely true. There was something else happening, something I wasn't quite ready to name. We fell into a comfortable rhythm. I'd show up at 7:30 every morning, and Hayes would already be there with coffee. He'd gotten my order memorized after the first week, black with 2 sugars, and every morning he'd hand me that paper cup with a smile that made my day feel possible. We'd work on cars together, him teaching me everything from basic oil changes to complex engine repairs. During lunch, we'd sit in the small office eating sandwiches and talking about everything and nothing. I learned that Hayes had grown up in this town, that his dad had owned the garage before him, that he'd learned to take apart engines before he learned algebra. I learned that he loved old muscle cars and terrible action movies and had a rescue dog named Socket, who sometimes hung around the garage. I learned that he was kind and funny and smarter than he gave himself credit for, that he had this quiet strength that made me feel safe in a way I'd never really felt before. "You're getting good at this," he said one afternoon as I successfully diagnosed a problem with a customer's brake system. "I knew you would." "You had more faith in me than I had in myself," I admitted. He looked at me with those warm brown eyes and said, "That's because I could see what you couldn't. You're smarter than you think, Dylan. You just needed someone to believe in you." Something shifted in that moment. The way he said my name, the sincerity in his voice, the way he looked at me like I mattered. I felt it in my chest. This warmth spreading through me, and I realized with a jolt of fear and excitement that I was developing feelings for him. Real feelings. The kind that kept me up at night, that made my heart race when he smiled at me, that made me hyper-aware of every accidental touch, every moment when we stood close together working on an engine. I tried to push it down, tried to convince myself it was just gratitude or admiration or some kind of misplaced hero worship. But it wasn't. I knew what it was, even if I wasn't ready to admit it out loud. I was falling for Hayes, my boss, my teacher, my friend, and I had no idea if he could ever feel the same way. One Friday evening, we were working late on a classic Mustang that Hayes was restoring in his spare time. Most of the other cars were done. The garage was quiet except for the radio playing softly in the background, and it was just the two of us. I was helping him remove the old engine, following his instructions, and we were close. Both of us bent over the engine bay, our shoulders almost touching. "Hand me that socket wrench," he said, and when I passed it to him, our fingers brushed. It was nothing, barely a touch, but I felt it like electricity. I looked up and found him looking at me, and for a moment neither of us moved. The air felt thick, charged with something unspoken. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Dylan," he said softly, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Something vulnerable and uncertain. "Yeah?" My own voice came out barely above a whisper. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something important, then seemed to think better of it. Never mind. Let's call it a night. It's late. I helped him clean up, both of us moving in this awkward silence that felt completely different from our usual comfortable quiet. When I got home to my tiny apartment, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. The way he'd looked at me, the way he'd said my name, the way the moment had felt like standing on the edge of something huge and terrifying. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Hayes, about his smile, his patience, his kindness, about the way my whole body came alive when he was near, about how much I wanted to know what his lips felt like, how his hands would feel on my skin, whether he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. I'd dated girls in college, had a couple of relationships that never quite felt right, always wondering what was wrong with me, that I couldn't seem to connect the way everyone else did. But this, what I felt for Hayes, this was different. This felt right in a way nothing ever had before. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and I had no idea what to do with it. The next Monday, things felt different. Hayes seemed quieter, more distant. We worked. But the easy conversation didn't flow like it usually did. I kept catching him watching me with this expression I couldn't quite read, like he was trying to figure something out. It made me nervous, made me wonder if I'd somehow given myself away, if he'd noticed the way I looked at him and was trying to figure out how to let me down easy. By Wednesday, I couldn't take it anymore. We were closing up for the day, and I just blurted it out. Did I do something wrong? Hayes looked surprised. What? No. Why would you think that? You've been different since Friday. Distant. I thought maybe I'd messed up somehow. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a small streak of grease, and let out a long breath. You didn't mess up. I've just been in my own head about something. Want to talk about it? I asked, even though I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answer. He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something internal, some decision he was trying to make. You want to grab a beer? Not as boss and employee, just as friends. Sure, I said, trying to ignore the way my heart sank a little at the word friends. We went to a dive bar a few blocks away, sat in a corner booth with our beers, and for a while we just made small talk. But I could feel the tension, the weight of whatever he wanted to say hanging between us. Finally, he took a long drink, set down his glass and looked me straight in the eye. I need to tell you something, and it might make things weird, and if it does, I'm sorry, but I think I owe you honesty. He paused, gathering courage. I'm gay, Dylan. I've known since I was a teenager, and I've never hidden it exactly, but I don't advertise it either. In a small town, running a business, you learn to be careful about what you share. My heart was racing. Okay, I said carefully, not sure where this was going. And the thing is, he continued, not meeting my eyes now, staring at his beer instead. I hired you because you needed help, and I needed help, and it seemed like a good arrangement. But somewhere along the way, you became more than just my employee. You became my friend. And then you became more than my friend, at least in my head. And I don't know what to do with that. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could do was stare at him as he finally looked up, his eyes vulnerable and scared. I have feelings for you, he said quietly. Real feelings. And I know that's probably not what you want to hear. And I know I'm your boss, which makes this complicated. And I know you're probably straight, and this is the last thing you expected. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep acting normal when being around you makes me feel anything but normal. The words came tumbling out of me before I could think them through. I'm not straight. Hayes blinked. What? I'm not straight, I repeated, my voice stronger now. I mean, I didn't really know that until recently. Until you. I've been lying awake at night trying to figure out what I was feeling, why I couldn't stop thinking about you, why every time you smiled at me, my whole day got better. And I think I've been scared to admit it, because it changes everything I thought I knew about myself. Dylan, he said, and my name sounded like a prayer. I have feelings for you too, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I've been falling for you for weeks, and I didn't know what to do about it. I thought I was crazy. I thought you could never feel the same way. He reached across the table and took my hand, and that simple touch felt like coming home. You're not crazy, he said softly, and I definitely feel the same way. We sat there holding hands across a sticky bar table, grinning at each other like idiots, and I felt something inside me unlock. Some part of myself I'd been keeping hidden finally allowed to breathe. This was real. This was happening. This terrifying, wonderful thing was actually happening. So what do we do now? I asked. Hayes smiled. That beautiful smile that had been undoing me for months. How about we start with a real date? Dinner? Somewhere nice. Not as boss and employee or even as friends. As two people who want to see where this goes. I'd like that, I said, and I couldn't stop smiling. Our first real date was that Saturday. Hayes picked me up wearing dark jeans and a button-up shirt, looking nervous and adorable, holding flowers he'd clearly agonized over choosing. We went to a small Italian restaurant the next town over. Somewhere we wouldn't run into customers or people who knew us. Somewhere we could just be ourselves. We talked for hours. About everything and nothing. Sharing stories and dreams and fears. He told me about coming out to his parents when he was 17. How his dad had struggled with it at first, but eventually came around. How his mom had just hugged him and said she loved him no matter what. I told him about my confusion in college, about relationships that never felt right, about always feeling like I was performing a role instead of living my truth. I think I was waiting for you, I said at one point, surprising myself with the honesty. I think some part of me knew there was something I hadn't figured out yet, someone I hadn't met yet. Hayes reached across the table and laced his fingers through mine. I'm glad you waited. I'm glad you walked into my garage that day. Best transmission failure of my life, I said, and he laughed. That wonderful, warm laugh I'd fallen in love with. After dinner, we drove to a spot Hayes knew, a hilltop overlooking the town, and we sat on the hood of his truck looking at the stars. He put his arm around me and I leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his solidity, his realness. And when he turned to look at me, when he cupped my face gently in his calloused hand, when he leaned in, slowly giving me every chance to pull away, I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was my first kiss with a man, my first real kiss that felt like truth instead of pretense. And it was everything. His lips were soft and sure, the kiss gentle, but full of promise. My whole body lit up, every nerve ending singing, and I understood finally what all those songs and poems and stories were about. This was what it felt like to kiss someone you were meant to kiss. When we pulled apart, both of us breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against mine. That was worth waiting for, he whispered. Yeah, I agreed, my voice shaky with emotion. It really was. We took things slow after that, figuring out how to navigate being together while working together, At the garage, we kept things professional, though we couldn't quite hide the smiles, the inside jokes, the way our eyes would meet across the shop and hold for just a moment too long. Outside of work, we were inseparable. We had dinner together most nights, either at his place or mine. We watched terrible action movies on his couch with Socket sprawled across our laps. We took drives into the countryside, talking about everything and nothing. We learned each other, slowly and carefully, building something real. Hayes taught me about more than just cars. He taught me about patience and persistence, about the satisfaction of fixing something broken, about the value of working with your hands. He taught me to trust myself, to believe I was capable of more than I'd ever thought possible. He taught me what it felt like to be loved exactly as I was, without needing to hide or perform or pretend. And I like to think I taught him some things too. I got him to read books again, something he'd stopped doing after high school. I introduced him to music he'd never heard, art he'd never considered. I reminded him that he was more than just his work, that he deserved rest and joy, and someone who saw all of him, not just the capable mechanic, but the thoughtful, sensitive, deeply good man underneath. 3 months after that first kiss, lying in his bed on a lazy Sunday morning with sunlight streaming through the windows, Hayes propped himself up on one elbow and looked down at me with such tenderness it made my chest ache. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's maybe too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Dylan." I reached up and pulled him down for a kiss, slow and sweet and full of everything I felt. "I love you too," I said against his lips. "I think I've loved you since you handed me that first cup of coffee and told me everyone deserves a chance." He smiled and kissed me again, and Socket barked from somewhere in the apartment, probably demanding breakfast. And it was perfect. It was messy and real and nothing like I'd imagined my life would be, and it was absolutely perfect. My car got fixed eventually, Hayes working on it in his spare time, teaching me every step so I'd know how to maintain it myself. But by the time it was running again, I'd moved most of my stuff into his place anyway. It just made sense. We worked together, we lived together, we built a life together. I'm not going to pretend it was always easy. We had arguments about stupid things like whose turn it was to do dishes or what to watch on TV. We had harder conversations about what being together meant in a small town where not everyone was accepting, about whether I wanted to be out at work or keep things private, about navigating family dynamics and future plans. But we worked through it all, because what we had was worth fighting for. A year after I first walked into his garage, Hayes made me a partner in the business. We changed the sign out front to Hayes and Dylan Auto Repair, and I stood there looking at my name painted in fresh red letters, feeling this overwhelming sense of pride and belonging. This was my place. This was my life. This was my person. "You earned it," Hayes said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You're the best investment I ever made." I turned in his arms and kissed him right there in the parking lot, not caring who might see. "You taught me everything," I said. "No," he said softly, touching my face with that gentle certainty I loved. "You already had it in you. I just helped you see it." Looking back now, I can't believe I almost missed this. If my transmission hadn't failed that exact morning, if I'd gone to a different garage, if Hayes hadn't taken a chance on some lost kid with no skills and too much student debt, my entire life would be different. I'd probably still be searching for something I couldn't name, still feeling like I didn't quite fit anywhere, still waiting for my real life to start. But I did walk into that garage. Hayes did offer to teach me. I did fall in love with a mechanic who saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. And that changed everything. Sometimes customers ask how we met, and we just smile and say it's a long story. But the truth is, it's simple. I showed up broken, and he taught me how to fix things, starting with myself. He called it an investment, but really it was an act of faith. Faith that I could learn, that I could grow, that I was worth the time and patience and care. And he was right. We both were. Because what we built together, in that garage that smells like motor oil and old coffee, is stronger than any engine, more valuable than any classic car. We built a love that's real and honest and true. And every single day I'm grateful for that broken transmission, that Tuesday morning, that moment when everything changed. Hayes still brings me coffee every morning, black with 2 sugars, and every morning I still feel that same flutter in my chest when he smiles at me. Socket still demands attention at inconvenient times. We still watch terrible action movies and work on cars and argue about whose turn it is to cook dinner. And I still fall asleep next to him every night feeling like the luckiest person alive. I never thought I'd fall in love in a garage, but I did. And it turns out that's exactly where I needed to be all along.